Thanks for joining us on the Culture Drop podcast. I'm your host, Jed, joined today by cultural iconoclast William Devitt. Today we're going to be discussing our favorite debut albums, including artists such as the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, U2, Big Country, Big Star, and the Modern Lovers. So enjoy the podcast.
Well, okay, dude, so you got a debut album?
Yeah. You ready for talk about favorite debut albums?
I think I am.
Okay.
These are records that, introduce people in various, bands and artists and acts to the world. So it's a big deal. Now, for me, several of these, of my choices, are actually on my desert island list.
Oh, okay.
Even several, if you can narrow it down to a top 10, which I can't. I tried a few years ago for a contest that 89.3 The Current was running.
Yeah.
Top 10 albums, but I didn't win anything. But, I guess I narrowed my down to 20, but the top 10 are really the meat of, the main thing. The ones where there are actually several are Desert Island discs. So how do you want to do this? You want to do it back and forth, or just individually? How do you want to do this?
Why don't we do back and forth? I won't be surprised if we have a crossover on several.
Oh, I'm sure there will be. I'm sure. Yeah. But how many do you have? What's your kind of approximate list, number-wise?
I probably have about 20 out of those. I could pick up a top 10.
Oh, okay. I'm just going to guess that you're going to have a couple or several that might be in your Desert Island, all-time list as well.
Yeah, I think so.
So that may be worth noting when those records come up. I don't know, where do we start here? It's a lot of, people, sounds change, and everything in personnel in bands or, orchestras, whatever, changes. But, these are records that, officially kind of introduce the bands or acts to the world. And, of course, there's always, preceding singles, A and B sides back in the good old days when they had those, or,
right.
EPs like that. So I guess I'm concentrating mainly on LPs.
Yeah.
And there will be a couple, one or two, that are questionable, but I think fit legitimately in the parameters of our scope of what we're talking about. I'll just get one out of the way, for example, of what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And it would be Iggy Pop, his very first solo album, which was recorded, wasn't released until shortly after his debut album, which was The Idiot, in 77. Bowie producing and using, Bowie's rhythm section. But this was recorded about a year, actually 2 years before then, but was also released in 77. And the name of the album is Kill City, and it's listed as Iggy Pop and James Williamson, who was Iggy and the Stooges, as opposed to the Stooges.
Yeah.
Their first two albums, and then the lineup changed. They more or less broke up, and Bowie convinced them not to, kind of like he did with Martha Hoople, and recorded one album, which is considered one of the greatest rock and roll albums ever, Raw Power. So this is right after that, and I think it was recorded in 75, 76. Iggy had checked himself into the psychiatric unit of UCLA's hospital psychiatric unit, and they let him out on weekends to work with James Williamson, who was the Stooges guitar players, one of the great guitar players.
Right.
And they recorded pretty low tech, probably on 8-track, an album that ended up being called Kill City, and was released on Bop Records, which is just kind of a very indie, before they had the word indie, a label, in 77. And I bought it in 78 as a 14-year-old, my very first exposure to Iggy, including the Stooges.
Yeah.
And it's a wonderful album. It's been remixed, masters were finally found a couple of years ago.
Wow.
James Williamson, who kept his wits about him. He quit the music industry to work as like a software engineer for a couple decades, like for Sony or IBM or something. And came back to do a Stooges reunion album, which I didn't think much of. They released 2 of them.
Yeah.
One with Ron Ashton on guitar, the original guitar player, and the second one had a great title called The Weirdness.
Yeah.
And then Ron died of natural causes or a heart attack, and they got together for a second one. This is, I don't know, 2007 or something like that, called Ready to Die, and that featured Williamson on guitar. And did some shows where they played the entire Raw Power album in its entirety. And so he didn't suffer from, the drug and alcohol, malaise and decrepitude. Kill City is one of my formative albums of any artist. And technically it's Iggy's first solo album. Even though not officially so, The Idiot came out on RCA, and The Idiot, and then very shortly after, Lust for Life. But so that would be an example of one of these kind of questionable debuts.
Yeah, well, that's actually really interesting to me, because I'm familiar with and love the Idiot album, and I always thought that was kind of his debut record. So what do you like about Kill City? And are there any songs on it that I would know?
No, probably not.
Okay.
Every track to me, it's one of those, every song is perfect albums. And there's 10 songs on the album, something like that. No, I think the Idiot was non-representative of Iggy. I like it for what it is. When I first heard it, I don't know, probably 79 or something, I bought a copy. I thought, this is stupid. This sounds like Kraftwerk. I don't like this kind of, this isn't Iggy Pop. This is stupid.
Yeah.
Even appreciating the sonic similarities between what Bowie was doing at the time. I wasn't a huge fan. I liked and I bought, Bowie's records, Low, Heroes, Lodger during that time. But 77, after hearing Kill City, it struck me as, what is this? And I bought the Stooges' Raw Power very briefly after buying Kill City.
Mm-hmm.
An import copy. It was out of print in the States. And I'm 14. And, of course, the sound of that, Bowie mixed it, and it's famously just gnarly, trebly mixed. So if you go for one thing and not the other, well, since those, I've grown and expanded my musical taste, but The Idiot at the time struck me as, this is dumb. And then when Lust for Life came out, it was a completely different sound, completely different band. The Sales Brothers on rhythm section, just everything about it, the approach, the production, even though it was still Bowie. Even that sounded slight and rinky-dink to me at the time. At the time, we're talking between 77 and 79 when I first really started, buying records with whatever money I had, paper routes and my first dishwashing jobs. What Kill City sounds like to me is the Rolling Stones. Sounds like what people consider to be the Stones' glory years, 68 to 73. That's what it sounds like. And James Williamson is the only guitar player on the record, and he sounds like Keith Richards on Beggar's Banquet. He's one of the great unsung guitar players. It's like the guy never made a false step. A lot of my favorite instrumentalists, I love them because they do make false steps. So they make mistakes and they're left on the record or whatever. Williamson never did that. And you think with an anarchic band like the Stooges, that he'd be, drug-addled or something like that, or just, amateurish. No, he had almost a higher tech sound than Keith Richards or Mick Taylor, who is, soon to join the Stones. So he had that fluidity in his playing.
Oh.
But it wasn't blues-based. It wasn't like even, Mick Taylor, God bless him. It wasn't, it was blues-based, but it wasn't cliched. And that's very hard to do when you're playing the active, very active lead style that he could do. But his rhythm playing, his chording, his chordal voicings were, I don't know why the Stones didn't consider him when Mick Taylor quit, when they were auditioning people, when, 75, when, Ronnie Wood, finally, got the job, as he should have.
Yeah.
Well, I guess it's because Williamson had just quit the music industry, just walked away from it to be...
Did he audition?
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Not that I know of, no. Yeah, I'm sure the Stones would have known of him. And certainly, they would have known, the Stooges.
And they auditioned about every other guitar player on the planet.
No, not that many. 10, less than 10. I can, name the ones that I know of that they did audition.
Yeah.
A couple that were considered briefly, say Mick Ronson. So anyway, Kill City, there's horns on it. The great sax player, got Steve Tranio. I've never heard of him. Detroit guys. Now he was recorded in Los Angeles, and the drummer on all but 2 tracks. The last 2 tracks have the Sales brothers, Hunt and Tony Sales, who would later record the Lust for Life album with Iggy, and then go on to be the rhythm section for Bowie's band from the early 90s.
Right.
What were they called?
Something Machine. Tin Machine.
Tin Machine, thank you, yeah. But this guy, Brian Glasscock, was the drummer, and it's strange, he's a Brit, and he ended up being the drummer for the Motels.
Okay.
The Motels.
Yeah.
And he had, at least their debut album was really great, just packed with great songs. Had some big hits, Take the L Out of Lonely and whatnot. He ended up moving to Minneapolis some years ago, and an old buddy of mine who actually played in a couple bands with, Glenn Graham, played in a straight blues band with this guy, Brian Glasscock. Mm-hmm. And Glenn is actually, by trade, he plays, guitar, wonderfully as well, and bass, but he's primarily a tenor sax player, and he's been Cornbread Harris's sax player for a couple decades now. Mm-hmm. Glenn Graham. Glenn, if you hear this, shout out to you, mate. But he played for several years in a local Twin Cities blues band. I can't remember the band, the name. It was some guy's name, someone Johnson, Derek Johnson or something. Some guy who you may have heard the name. But but just, kind of a bar blues band as far as I know. And Brian Glasscock was the drummer. And he's the drummer on this album, Kill City, by Iggy and James Williamson. So there's a little thing. Of course, I didn't find that out for decades later when I met Glenn, and then even years after that, looked it up, I Googled it, and so it's on the internet because everything on the internet is true. But Kill City is one of those albums that is kind of on the borderline between a true debut and something that was actually recorded but not released later, before their official debut. Okay, boy, that was long-winded, yeah?
Well, it's exciting for me because I wasn't even aware of this album, so I'm excited to hear it.
My very first copy, when I bought when I was 14, was on green vinyl, semi-transparent green vinyl.
Oh, nice.
And I think an old girlfriend ended up getting it. And it was probably bad sound. It sounded great at the time. It's probably because colored vinyl tends to be not real great quality vinyl. But the actual tapes that they used to were second generation, very brief mix that Williamson had done in '76. While Iggy was still in the nut house at UCLA, and he found the original master tapes. I don't know, 2007, something like that.
Yeah.
And remastered it and remixed it himself and pulls out all sorts of things: guitar, vocal things, saxophone things, keyboard things. It sounds like a Stones album. It's not like a Stooges album. There's keys, there's sax, there's guitar, acoustic guitars, ballads. And he pulled them out into the mix. Just a wonderful, one of the finest remixes I've ever heard. That could be another topic that we could dedicate a whole show to, is remixes of albums that do work and don't work, as opposed to remasters.
Sure.
So, yeah, it's a wonderful album. And, it's not the Stooges. It's not just, this hard, cold-blooded, pounding thing. It has the feel of, say, a Rolling Stones album.
Okay.
Okay, well, there's that. I spent a lot of time on that. Where do you want to go from here? You want me to keep going, or you want to jump in with something?
Yeah, let me jump in. Let's go. Let's ping pong back and forth.
Okay.
I've got Boy by U2. Did you have that one on your list?
Yes, I do. That's not on my top 10, but it's certainly on there. It's number 13. Yeah.
Recorded July through September 1980, and get this, released the next month in October 1980. That would be unheard of today. Produced by Steve Lillywhite, recorded at Windmill Lane in Dublin, Ireland. It was engineered by some guy named Paul Thomas. I'm not sure who that is, but...
Paul who? Paul Thomas?
Paul Thomas.
No, I'm not familiar with the name.
Kevin Maloney was the assistant engineer, and I think, wasn't he part of the group that was in that Unforgettable Fire documentary with Eno and Lanois?
Oh, I don't know, maybe.
Okay.
Kevin Maloney, I would imagine. A name like that.
Not sure, but just looking at the song list here, every song on here is great. Just walking through here, I Will Follow, Twilight, Uncut Dub, Into the Heart, Out of Control, Stories for Boys, The Ocean, A Day Without Me, Another Time, Another Place, The Electrico, and Shadows and Tall Trees, which is possibly my favorite song on the entire album. I guess Lillywhite didn't like the sound of the drums on the single he did before that. So it's good that he worked with them previous to this, because the album is, to me, it's just got a great sound to it. It's got reverb, but it's bright. It sparks with electricity. It's curious because I always thought it was a great sounding record. And I read something recently where Bono said when they were touring this and for several years, he never really listened to the record. But they clearly liked the songs because, like Live at Red Rocks, which was, what, 83, 84?
May of 83, yeah.
They covered, a lot of these songs were in their set list.
Yeah, I'm sure they still do. I'm sure they still pull out "I Will Follow" or maybe even "Out of Control." But certainly, I Will Follow. I'm sure. I don't follow you two anymore. Whereas after hearing this record, their first 3 records, their first 4 records, their first 5 records, even their first 6th and 7th album, I thought they were the greatest thing since White Bread. So essentially from the early 80s, I think I discovered them a year or 2 after Boy was released. I think 82 is when I discovered them.
But if we just focus our magnifying glass on this album for you, what was your impression of it at the time and what's your impression of it now?
It sounded like and still feels like a brightly lit up Christmas tree.
Oh, nice.
And has that feel, including the emotional feel, psychological.
Yeah.
At the time that I first heard it, which I listened to incessantly, I guess that would be, I was, 16, 17. Even then, there was a sense of loss and longing and remembrance. So there's huge melancholy.
Like a wisdom beyond their years.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
And a lot of those themes are actually addressed on the album, and that's probably why they called the album Boy. And yeah, it's a miracle of an album, and I know it's not cool to like U2, and especially not cool to like Bono as a person for perverse reasons. That he uses his celebrity for good, for what he feels is good, and what he can do to help make the world, as Joe Strummer put it, a less miserable place. People, after a certain point, say after the Joshua Tree, or even with the Joshua Tree in '87, kind of overlook this album, and indeed their first 2 albums, this and then October, which came out a year later in '81.
Yeah.
And the War album came out in late '83, or late '82. And of course, that is when their kind of commercial and radio stature started to rise with New Year's Day and Two Hearts Beat as One, Sunday Bloody Sunday. And the huge tours they did, but you got to remember when Boy came out, they were still like 18, 19 years old.
That's right.
And they'd had a couple singles. Their last single, 11 O'Clock Tick Tock, Back with Touch, were produced by Martin Hammett, who is sort of the post-punk du jour producer. Joy Division. And people like that. I don't know who else.
Well, and kind of to what you're alluding to, they had an EP that was called 3 that came out in 1979 that was produced by Chaz Diwali, and it had several songs that ended up on Boy, like Out of Control, Stories for Boys, Boy Girl.
It's a terrible sounding.
It's a terrible sound, so it's a testament to...
It sounds like demos. It sounds like demos. I loved it. I still love it for what it is, just for the immediate clarity of the instruments and the playing. But it sounds like demos.
But it just shows what a great job Steve Labolite did.
Well, yeah. I'm sure he saw them live and, beforehand to, see, capture the vibe of how they came off live. And, they were electrifying back then. I remember my older brothers Sean and Nick seeing them at First Avenue on the tour supporting Boy in '81, and I think Sean told me, but there were people like walking around like laughing with these huge smiles on their faces and tears are streaming down their face.
Really?
They had no idea what to make of what was going on. Then my brother Nick, told me later, I remember, I just put on the Boy album. He said, no, I don't want to hear that. Every song makes me cry.
Wow.
The same for me is with the follow-up album, October, which is roundly poo-pooed by everybody, including the band, and that might be, like, in my mind, their greatest album ever, but that's another story. Boy, yeah, it's one of the great debuts. They changed their vibe, and not so much their vibe, but their sound and their approach. And Bono became more of a poet in the real sense, more of a poet in the pretentious sense. They moved on and became what we know of U2 is today.
Yeah, just the careful thought that went into the ancillary percussion of, like the bottles in I Will Follow, or drums being... Were there any drums recorded in the stairwell for this album? I don't know.
Apparently that was later with the War album.
Yeah, it might have been War album.
Recorded at Windmill Lane in Dublin. They put the drums for Sunday Bloody Sunday and
right.
all the songs in the stairwell. The Stones did that a decade later with their Voodoo Lounge album at the same studio, Windmill Lane, for a couple songs.
Yeah. But just the little touches of like the bottles and I Will Follow is a cool little touch.
I don't even know if those are bottles or a xylophone. Is somebody clinking something, banging. That would happen again on the opening track for their next album, October, Gloria. During the breakdown and that, and apparently it's a real thing, and you can really hear it. It sounds like it's a studio effect, but somebody dropped a teacup or it rattled, from the sound onto the floor and spins around. Not a teacup, but a little teacup platter, right?
Yeah. And
spins around, and Lily White captured it and then treated it, and it spins. How something spinning will eventually die down. Something making a clanging sound. So that's a similar thing that what you're talking about with I Will Follow, which I don't know if that's bottles clanging or just a xylophone or something.
It says here that for the middle eight, Lily White recorded the sounds of cutlery rubbing against the spokes of a spinning wheel on an upturned bicycle, as well as Bono smashing bottles.
Oh, okay. It could be. Yeah. I guess I haven't researched it that much. Lily White was a great one early on for making noises.
Yeah, and a glockenspiel, to your point, for the parts that are actually hitting notes.
Yeah, Lily White really had a great sense of a cinematic quality to production. And it wasn't, 80s production, which is, was what he was heading into, the 80s. It's often very noisy, abrasive, startling sounds, little effects, I could cite all the records, not just from U2, but all kinds of, people that he produced up until a certain point, up until Dave Matthews Band, which I know nothing and care nothing about. And Steve Lily White has apparently claimed that that's the finest debut album he ever recorded.
Which one?
Dave Matthews Band's debut, Under the Table and Dreaming, or whatever.
We'll just forget he said that.
Right. But no, Steve, he had a great sense of noise.
Yeah.
Noise. And that noise is all over U2's Boy album. The noise of the band. The band is not terribly technically well accomplished. Just kind of making up their own sounds, and hence, for better or worse, making up a huge huge influential sound, from the '80s and the '90s, and until the present. Ask Chris Martin and what's his band?
Coldplay.
Yeah, very different band. Those first three albums, very different band from what they'd become after they started working with Eno and Daniel Lanois.
Right. What do you got next?
Well, let's see. Okay. Eno's Here Come the Warm Jets.
Nice.
Brian Eno's from '73, I think, and he just left Roxy Music. One of these albums, again, just every song on it you look forward to.
Yeah.
It's all over the place. The sound. I don't know who engineered it, but yeah, he's got Phil Manzanera from Roxy Music, Chris Spedding, Robert Fripp, on guitars. It's just, I don't know, if you were, an adult in kindergarten at the time, some, time warp, discontinuum or something, this would be the album for you. Just
an adult in kindergarten, I like it.
Say again?
I like this adult in kindergarten analogy.
It's something like that. I mean, it's something like that. Yeah. And it's just wonderful. And yeah, he's gone on to be Eno, but this first album, and it rocks mightily.
Yeah.
It rocks, and it rolls, but it also has the lullaby quality to it. A couple songs, just beautiful. I don't even want to use the word ambient, because actually the sound of the record sounds like a 1973, British, cutting-edge rock and roll album. Bowie or John Cale or Roxy Music or Mott the Hoople or whatever. The sound of it is very immediate and textured. It's not, the ambient thing yet, but Here Come the Warm Jets. One of the great debuts. Yeah.
Nice.
You want to go?
Yeah. I've got the Beatles debut album, I'm going to go with the UK release, which was considered the official Beatles release. It's called Please Please Me, released in March 22nd, 1963. It's kind of famous, well, for many reasons. One is it's just the debut album by the Beatles.
Yeah, no kidding.
Which is significant in itself. Secondly, it's got a great live sound to it. The bulk of the album was recorded in one day. And the Beatles basically just came in and played songs from their live set. It is a mix of originals and covers. John Lennon had a cold that day. He had a sore throat. And he was supposed to sing Twist and Shout, which, as we know from the recorded version, which is one of the great vocals of all time.
Oh, yeah.
His voice was shredded, which is part of why it's so good. So they saved that to the last song of the day. And he was sucking throat lozenges all day. Like all Beatles albums, I think there were 14 songs on the record, 7 on each side. Now, all 14 were not recorded that day. I think there was 4 songs from an EP that they included there. So I think they recorded 10 songs that day, which is pretty amazing. I mean, we're talking from, the initial drum track through tracking all the instruments to the final vocal. And it's got a real warm live sound to it. Just the right amount of reverb. It's EQ'd just right. Just the right amount of compression. You just feel the energy of this band coming into the universe, beautifully captured. Some songs that are on the record, just to give you a feel for it. I Saw Her Standing There, Twist and Shout, Love Me Do, which was already released as a single, P.S. I Love You. There's some great covers like Anna, Chains. There's a George Harrison song called Do You Want to Know a Secret? There's A Taste of Honey, which is a cover. Every song on here is really great. It shows how much they grew as a band. Like, there's a famous bootleg of when they auditioned for Decca Records on New Year's Day. I think it was 1963, and it doesn't sound nearly as good as this, and it just shows how much they had grown as a band between New Year's Day 1963 and when they recorded this, later. Actually, that may have been, the Decca edition may have been New Year's Day 1962, because this was recorded between, if you count the singles, September 1962 and February 1963, released in March 1963.
Yeah, so no, for me, it would be, for my older brothers and sisters, I have, 7 siblings, 6 older than me, 1 younger than me. It would be the U.S. copy,
Meet the
US
Beatles
version, and of course that, as most of the albums at the time, maybe you know more about this than I would, the UK version, but it was stereo, but that horrible sort of 2-track mimic stereo where the instrumentation is on one side, the vocals are on the other.
Yeah.
And even with that, the percussion, tambourines, maracas, what have you, are all really, really loud. So, sound quality hadn't really, at least a stereo system for recording. It was brand new. Nobody really knew, what they were doing and how to deal with these small combos with, loud electric guitars. I'm assuming that later issues, certainly in the CD era of the mono version, are much more impactful.
Yeah, well, the mono and the stereo, it turned out, people found out later when Americans like me got their hands on the UK version, were like, whoa, this was actually recorded beautifully. George Martin actually did know how to record bands like this, and he had recorded bands before this, so he knew what he was doing.
Oh yeah. I not so much the recording, but how it was actually, say, remixed, for public consumption in the UK and the US. I guess that would be more record label decisions. Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, certainly it wasn't just the Beatles. The Stones later, all those original, British invasion bands.
Yeah, there was a real tragedy that happened that for the American releases, which had different covers, different titles, different track orders, which completely were not approved by the Beatles at all, they would take the master tapes and they would add a bunch of reverb to it. It would not sound as clean. And so the Americans, officially until they came out on like CD in like 87, they didn't really know how great these UK releases sounded. So we were just listening to kind of substandard versions of the Beatles, especially these early records.
Yeah, I guess maybe a similar thing, not quite similar to the Beat, not till 1976, 77. The Clash's debut, which is on my list, but it doesn't make my top 10. And it's the original UK version.
Yeah.
And apparently it was considered, it was on CBS Records, but it's considered too raw sounding for the U.S. and Epic Records was their U.S. affiliate, and so that album wasn't released in the U.S. I had an import copy, which I bought in late 77, early 78 with my paper out money or whatever, and the U.S. version wasn't released till 79, after their second album, Give 'Em Enough Rope, had been released, properly in the U.S. on Epic Records was their U.S. Distributor. And the U.S. version is far superior. I don't think anybody, even the staunchest, Clash purist, would just have to admit that it's just the superior album with, the singles, Complete Control, White Man in Hammersmith Ballet, I Fought the Law, their version of I Fought the Law, which is brand new at the time, 79. For the 4 songs that they deleted from the original album, just far stronger album.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're not talking about, in the case of, say, the Beatles or the Stones, different, sound effects or, separation, technical imbalances or changes going on. They use the master tapes for the U.S. version. But it's one of the great, and up until, maybe it still holds the record as the all-time greatest or highest selling import album in the U.S. And held that distinction for several decades, and maybe still does, I don't know. But that's not on my top 10, but that would certainly be one of the great debuts is the Clash's self-titled first album.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes sense. The other thing I want to just say about this record before we move on, the Beatles debut, is, you'll notice there's no I Want to Hold Your Hand, there's no She Loves You, the big songs of what they call the four-headed monster of the Beatles and Beatlemania. This was just kind of putting their signal out into the universe and kind of laying the groundswell for Beatlemania that would grow over the next year, culminating in their appearance in New York on the Ed Sullivan Show in 1964.
That is 64, Ed Sullivan, wow.
Yeah, so this was over a year before that, where Beatlemania was growing in the UK, but it just goes to show you how much time they had to just polish their act, and by the time they got here, they were just ready to destroy the press, destroy audiences. They just had their act. They were just, they were a well-oiled machine by that time, let's say.
Yeah, they've been playing for, at least 2 years and in various iterations for longer than 2 years. Prior to that, what was the exact date of the Sullivan Show in 64? I was thinking, I was born in 64, March 24. And so I have the Stones debut, the U.S. version called England's Newest Hitmakers, which I think was released in May of 64, but in the UK it was released like mid-April.
Okay, here's the exact date, Willie. The debut performance, they did several performances, but the first one, seen by over 73 million viewers, was on February 9th.
February, okay.
Yeah.
I'm trying to line it up with me and my birth date and the Aries horoscope sign, zodiac sign.
When was your birthday?
Line these things up.
What day was your birthday?
March 24.
Okay.
Of 64. So even the Stones album didn't come out. Well, it came April 17th was the UK release, so that's still an Aries sign. If you're going for any of this stuff, and I don't, but it still interests me.
Yeah.
The zoological thing. It's a great debut, and I have to put it on my top 10 just for what it is. There's 2 songs out there, Stone Cold classics, but they recorded apparently over like 5 days at Regent Sound in London, and the levels are all over the place. The sonic levels, the mixing. Yeah, it's got Richard, Andrew Loog Oldham, was his producer. I don't know who engineered. Maybe young guys like Glenn Johns or Chris Thomas worked on it. Who knows?
Yeah.
It's mostly, it's covers. And they're exciting as hell. And so you get the tambourines are the loudest thing on the record sometimes, and the hand claps and the maracas. If you have a good stereo, well, EQ. But you'll have to EQ each song differently because the levels are all over the place, song to song.
Uh-huh.
But the two Stone classics are, well, the first song that, introduced the world, which is on the U.S. version. I think it is not on the British version, which is just called The Rolling Stones. And in the U.S. it was called England's Newest Hitmakers. But, so the first song on the U.S. version is Buddy Holly's Not Fade Away, which they, put the heavy, Bo Diddley beat on. Just, shows how they're one of the few acts that really got Bo's rhythm and his rhythm subtleties down. I mean, it's a huge, huge rhythm that everybody used for, well, they maybe still do today, but it became more ponderous and obvious, boom, 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 boom. Well, that's not just how the Bo Diddley beat went. And they got, in under 2 minutes, doing Buddy Holly's Not Fade Away. Brian's, wailing harmonica, which I don't like as much as Jagger's harmonica, which he was playing at the same time too, or at least in the same era. But Charlie and Bill, and Keith just plays an acoustic on it, overdubs a very brief electric little, lead fill. And
now, is this on your list, or are you just kind of talking about it?
Say again?
Is this on your top debut records list?
Yeah, it is. But
Okay.
it's kind of, I have to put it on the top 10 just because of what it was signifying for me and the future of popular music, specifically rock and roll music. But it's not one of my favorite debuts. The Stones are probably, maybe kind of like you with the Beatles, probably my favorite band. Because they kind of started it all. And unlike the Beatles, the Stones are still working. I know, Paul and Ringo are still working and releasing, but that's kind of where it started in 1964 with this. And it's so it's a great album by musical standards. Is it a great Rolling Stones album? No, their next one would be much better when they got to the U.S. and were able to start recording at Chess Studios in Chicago.
Yeah.
Or RCA Studios in L.A., Dave Hassinger and, real engineers who knew what they were doing. And, of course, they were playing and touring constantly. So, they were growing as an ensemble, as individual musicians, in just lightning time. Very much like the Beatles. Very much like a whole lot of those bands. Especially British bands, who were starting to, it's like, ooh, this British invasion thing, ooh, let's promote these people, let's try and sell their records, Herman's Hermits, or Dave Clark 5, or, whoever. So I have it on there, the Stones debut, but there's one thing, there's a song on there called Tell Me, and it's their first proper original composition.
Yeah, sure.
And to my knowledge, they never played it live. And it's just one of the classic. It's a template for that, mid-tempo, ballady, lush quality that the Stones would excel at and still do to this day. Lyrics just not terribly romantic, more blues or heart-stricken, young, post-adolescent signifying. Tell Me. It's been on a couple of compilations through the decades. To me, it might be on one of my Stones. Certainly top 20, maybe even top 10. And nobody knows about it. The Stones don't know about it. I don't think I've ever played it. Why not? It's just a heartbreaking, just a raw, just pure emotion. And the sound it's raw and unusual. The tambourine's really loud. Charlie plays his floor tom really loud instead of his kick drum. Brian or Keith, I think, plays a 12th string. One of them plays an electric lead, just a very brief. It's just raw, and the melodic sensibility. It has nothing to do with American blues or 12 bar or even the 1-4-5 progression. So between that and the cover of Buddy Holly's "Not Fade Away," that's the album right there. And of course, you get Chuck Berry's "Carol" played at 20 BPMs faster than Chuck's version, and the hand claps are as loud as the lead vocals. So that's an added thrill. Mm-hmm. But no, that's not a great debut, but I have to represent it.
Yeah, no, I like "Tell Me," and that's interesting that they never played it live.
Yeah, I don't think so. Certainly not the modern era.
The one thing I wanted to also say about the U2 Boy album is the album cover was different in the UK and the US. It was these blurred images of the four members of U2 in the US, and it was a picture of a boy's face in the UK. But both really cool album covers, and the cool thing about the US album cover is it to your point, it just kind of added to like the mystery of the band. We didn't really know that much about them, and we didn't even see their faces on their cover.
That's right. That really was a thing for me up until, even including the War album. I bought all three of those albums. Well, my brother Nick had the Boy and October album. Yeah. But he had the American version of Boy with the strange graphics, and so I didn't know anything about them. What do these guys look like? What are they? And then October is the complete opposite. The album cover is really a big, full color picture of them all standing in a group.
Right. That's right.
Wow.
But,
oh wow, these guys are boring looking. And then, of course, with War, again, you have the same child, same child as on the original UK album cover, just like 2 years older. And his face, except with the busted lip. Well, you're talking about the Big Country album, and I should say when I got that in the late fall of '83, and I just moved for the second time away from home, the house I grew up in. And I had the original album cover, and it was blue, but it had this textured, there's a word for it, but a textured album cover with an embossed gold for the album, for the words "The Crossing" and "Big Country." And it was like a textured quality to the material, like knitted or something. And so that was the original U.S. release, and it was blue. Well, apparently in the U.K., the original album cover was green, not blue.
Oh, okay.
And then on the continent, outside of the UK, it was red.
Right? Okay.
And apparently in Canada there was even a black version where it was black with, gold embossed lettering. So that's just a little fun fact for people who are fond of The Crossing. It remains for me very much like U2's debut, Boy. It sort of has the feel of a big lit up Christmas tree. It's mysterious. The themes you can latch onto. The lyrics are printed, but you don't want to read them. You want to listen to it for like 5 years before you actually read the lyrics, which is what I did. I never knew all the lyrics to the songs. Stuart Adamson's a very different singer. Was a very different singer from Bono. Bono has a natural, great voice. Sort of a classic Irish tenor. Where Stuart Adamson, was not a singer originally, and he's a guitar player and primary musical songwriter for his previous band, the Skids, in Scotland, Dunfermline. But his delivery was a very almost staid or stoic quality to his vocals. One thing about his songwriting, I'll just talk about the lyrical writing on that album, and actually for the next two albums, but more since we're talking about, The Crossing, their debut, I would say that his lyric writing actually matches Bob Dylan's for being as effective on just without music, without accompaniment, with just on the printed page. It's a certain tradition that he's coming from. It's not just, Robert Burns and, the Scottish tradition, the Celtic tradition. But they work that well. Not the improvisational style of, say, Bono, his sort of streamless consciousness, ad-libs.
I think both Stuart Adamson's lyrics on this and a lot of Dylan's are steeped in mythology.
But Adamson's are very specific.
Right.
And you're talking about just one album. I would claim the next two albums are to be as strong lyrically. I'm just talking about lyrically. And Dylan's had some garbage, too, through the years. I'm a huge Dylan fan, as you are. Not garbage, but he's had a lot of throwaways. And you can tell when he's doing it. And a lot of times his throwaways are meant to be throwaways. He's coming from a whole lot of different traditions. Adamson was coming from, on this album, The Crossing, one tradition. He had yet to embrace American blues, country, folk, that tradition. Adamson says he was coming from a strange tradition, which in the Skids was this Euro, post-punk thing, which owed as much to Bowie at the time as it did more to Bowie than it did to, say, The Clash. And after Stuart Adamson died in, 99, 2000, like that, and there were various tributes, and it was either Joe Strummer, who is just alive and soon to die, or maybe Mick Jones. One of them said that the Skids were the only band, The Clash, that was ever nervous to follow on stage.
Mm-hmm.
As an opening band. I think the Skids only opened for The Clash a couple times. Dundee and maybe Glasgow. Richard Jobson was the singer, a very quirky, unusual singer, went on to be a big, BBC presenter, which is what he does today. And, lyrically very, very, obtuse and whatnot. And clearly Stewart wanted to get away from that sort of obscure, Jobson's obsession with, history and the cerebral aspect of something cerebral and more emotional and humane, but human also. And so there's a very, that's probably where the sort of folk quality that people recognized in very early Big Country was in his writing. But granted, it was very British Isles sense of folk and mythology. He had yet to discover, and ultimately moved to the United States. So I thought, to the band's detriment and his songwriting to his detriment, and even his vocal, his singing voice, detriment. But that first album, I think there's nothing like it in popular music.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's, again, like the first U2 album, it's produced by Steve Lillywhite, and it's got a certain crispness to its production that I think his production really benefits this band. I remember hearing the single in a Big Country. It was all over the radio in the summer of 1983. The single came out in May, and the full album came out in July. And I remember just turning the radio dial and hearing it in the car, and then that video came out where they're like tooling around on three-wheelers. It was all over MTV. And it was just such an exciting new sound because they made guitars sound Celtic, like bagpipes. And apparently they were using something called an MXR pitch transposer effect pedal to make it sound like bagpipes. And they also used the EBow, which gave the guitar a certain drone, which gave the album, like you had mentioned, certain Celtic overtones, with this punk and rock and roll energy. And then in addition to, being a lot of Celtic mythology, like you say, it's very specific, and there's songs about loss, like In Words and Chants. There's songs about separation, close action. There's a song about the 1745 Jacobite rebellion and the storm. You've got songs like pipe band rhythms in songs like In a Big Country and Fields of Fire, and the swirling Gaelic guitar intro to The Storm, which sometimes people call this a Celtic rock band for those kinds of reasons.
Yeah, Stewart apparently really disliked the bagpipe analogy to their guitar playing. He'd been playing that way since the Skids, and a lot of this very powerful major key approach, very bright but powerful, almost like Mick Ronson's work with Bowie's Spiders from Mars, was evident 5 years earlier in the Skids. They released 3 albums, and sort of petered out, and while he quit the band and formed Big Country. He apparently very much disliked that bagpipe reference. I don't think it's so much the sound, it's the patterns and the motifs of Highland bagpipes, as opposed to, say, Irish bagpipes or the Ilian pipes or Greek or various other bagpipes around the globe. A certain quality that he was certainly going for. I don't think the guitars, at the time, I kind of latched onto it and thought, oh yeah, bagpipes, yeah. But it's a big, broad sound. It's a very unfunky sound that they had. It's highly danceable, but yet not in sort of the African American tradition of funk. The guitars are pretty much, and it's not just Stewart's playing, it's Bruce Watson, and they're one of the great guitar duos ever. sometimes you can't tell who's playing what, and if you see them live or watch a live video or something, you might be surprised, like who's playing which parts, because the parts are so well defined.
Right. We should give a shout out to Tony Butler, who's an excellent bass player, and Mark Brzezicki, who plays the drums.
Oh yeah, yeah. And early on, Tony Butler's bass playing, hey, he had this. It was a very mid-rangey quality. It was not this deep, heavy. They were a very loud band. I saw them in the day after Thanksgiving of '83 at First Avenue. It was just really loud, but just tremendous sound quality. But he was not this ultra low, typical rock bass sound tone that he had. He developed that later. I don't go for it, but he and Brzezicki were obviously they're called Rhythm for Hire, and they were a working duo for session musicians as a rhythm section. And Tony Butler had a very mid-rangey sound, but he was obviously caught up with what Adamson and Watson were doing, and so his bass lines were these very intricate, snaky, but catchy bass lines, and they're very active. It's like you won't wait. They would operate. His bass lines operated, to my mind, as a third guitar, and I'm talking about live, not on not on record, with overdubs, but even live.
Sure.
It was just a spellbinding sound they had. I've never heard anything like it before or since. Even in different styles of popular music, or even avant-garde traditions or whatever. It's a strange sound. You say, well, that harkens back to a Celtic sound, very scaled of British Isles music, Irish or Scottish or Welsh or English. Yes, I understand that, although I didn't understand it at the time. But to this day, it still sounds. If you see a live, concert of the band up until say 1986 or something, a video of Big Country, it's like three guitars on stage. I understand the bass is a bass. He's a guitar, very snaky, but not like he's showing off chops. Like everything he plays means something, just like everything Stuart Adamson and Bruce Watson meant something. They're both very active players. They're playing very intricate and active parts. How they pulled it off live for all those decades, I have no idea. Mark Brzezicki on drums, forget about it. He's a one-man marching band. He's a very eccentric style of playing, very powerful, but he could sound like a one-man marching band. That's just the way the guy plays. That's his natural style. Very busy within the confines of very precise, very heavy rhythms. Almost a prog player, prog, except with a very heavy pulse, a very heavy heartbeat.
Regardless of what Stuart Adamson says or thinks, when I hear the solo in the song "A Big Country," I could easily hear a bagpipe playing that tune. It just has that quality to it. And I know a lot of other people heard that too, like when you read the reviews of the record at that time.
No, people weren't just making that up just because, only half the band was from, Scotland. In fact, none of them were born in Scotland. Stuart is actually born in Manchester, and Bruce is born in Canada before their families relocated to Dunfermline, which is a little suburb of Fife, Scotland. Nobody was making that up. Clearly, they had that, particularly Stuart had that in mind. but it was just an influence. It's like saying, some guitar player, Carlos Santana, or Mick Taylor with the Stones, loves Coltrane, famous. I want to do a Coltrane who's doing a guitar. Fair enough. It doesn't sound like Coltrane playing, tenor sax, but it's the influence and what you're trying to project. And I think that's what Stewart was trying to do, and then with Bruce Watson later, was project that quality of what the Highland pipes can have on people.
The interesting thing to think about is the name of the band, Big Country. We're talking about the Celtic influences and so forth, but Scotland is not a big country. So, you're talking about how later, he went more Americana or he went more country. Just the name Big Country to me makes me think of like the wide open skies of Montana or something. It's almost like he created the seeds of where he would go in the future when he moved to the United States by naming his band Big Country in a way.
Yeah, maybe. I sort of thought that a little bit, kind of glimpses, but you kind of elucidated it a little bit more. And I'll say this: I've never cared for the name, the band name, Big Country. I just never liked it. It seemed just off to me. When I first heard, their sound, and I've never liked the name.
It's a weird name.
It's a weird name for what they were doing, or what Stewart imagined, or Stewart and Bruce Watson. Looking forward to decades later, where they arrived at musically before Stewart's death. There could be some prescience to it, I suppose. One thing I should add, just quickly, talking about Steve Lillywhite's just marvelous production on this album, is that the album was originally slated to be produced by Chris Thomas.
That's right.
And indeed, their first single, and Harvest Home, for my money, is as good, maybe better, than Lillywhite's album version. It was their first single, and didn't do well in the charts. Very different sounding, very different texture, very different feel to it. So much that just a lay person, a non-musician, would notice the difference. And there were some tracks from those sessions that were released a few years ago on a deluxe version of The Crossing. 3 or 4 Chris Thomas produced, and they sound pretty much the same. The same arrangements. The band just had their stuff together. They just had their stuff together, and that's something that Bruce Watson said. It didn't matter if it was Chris Thomas. It didn't matter for Steve Lillywhite. Their job was to capture what we already had going. We didn't need a producer. We just need somebody to put us on tape. And apparently, the reason, Thomas left the sessions early is James Honeyman Scott from the Pretenders, had died. And, he was, very close to the band, personal friends with the Pretenders, and it struck him in a horrible way. And, later, their bassist, Pete Farden, would die as well. But that's why he's committed to other projects, including the Pretenders, which would have been their third album, which wouldn't show up for another year. But Chris Thomas, that's the reason for his leaving the Big Country sessions for the Crossing. So how that album would have sounded differently or not so differently. To me, there's sonic differences, great sonic differences between Chris Thomas's work at the time and Steve Lillywhite's work at the time.
Right.
To me, it would be fascinating to have the full. Well, maybe we have. Maybe they've released everything they recorded with Thomas. The Harvest Home single and Bells appeared on The Crossing, and don't sound that much different, really, arrangement-wise or like that. But anyway, we're obviously both big fans of this album, and it's obviously had a big impact on us both. So we could delve endlessly into the mystery of the album, of the music, which still retains mystery to me.
Oh yeah,
great mystery, and it's a beautiful thing for me.
Yeah.
Where are we at?
What do you got?
Well, I guess you brought up the Crossing. The Pretenders' debut album.
Oh yeah, I've got that one on my list too.
Not in my top 10, but it has to be mentioned just for the impact it had. Those first two Pretenders albums, well, first three, but particularly the original band, the first two, are two of the finest modern rock and roll albums by anybody. I've got the Modern Lovers album as well.
Me too.
Jonathan Richman's first album, produced by John Cale in 72, not released until 75, 76, I think.
Yeah, that's just unbelievable to me.
Yeah, and to me, it sounds like it could have been recorded 5 minutes ago. It's like, the Strokes and people like that, like, the Strokes are a good band, but, like, it still sounds contemporary,
Yeah, agreed.
But without any fancy production, or fancy, studio trickery. What do you got?
I've got Big Star #1 record, which is a great title, kind of cheeky, like it's like it's a #1 in the charts, right?
I knew that would show up for you. I was pretty sure. Yeah.
And a couple things about this record. Again, it's kind of spooky because it's recorded so well. It's recorded at Arden Studios, which was a famous studio in Arden, and they were friends with...
In Memphis, Tennessee, yeah. Arden, yeah.
Yeah. They were friends with John Fry, the founder, and basically he'd let them record at night when no one else was recording at their leisure. So they took their own sweet time until it was just... everything was just sounding perfect. So just the sound of this record is incredible. The way the acoustic guitars are recorded, everything. Every song on here is great. There's songs like The Ballad of El Gudo, which rocks. There's songs like 13, which is a sweet acoustic ballad. When My Baby's Beside Me, you'd probably know.
September Girls on that album?
September Girls is not on this record.
Oh, that's on the next one, or?
Yeah, I think that's on the next one. Everything on here is to the level of September Girls. It's like this band just came out of nowhere, fully formed, and it's one of those records where it just sounds great loud, it sounds crisp, it sounds clear, all the playing and arrangements are fantastic, the songs are great songs, the singing, everything about it. It's a great pop/rock and roll record.
And as you know, I'm not hip.
And
after all these years, I'm a big Replacements fan, a really big Replacements fan. I'm supposed to love it, not only love, but know Alex Chilton's work. And
so Alex Chilton, just to clarify for our listeners, was the main singer, along with Chris Bell in Big Star. And then Alex Chilton went on to do solo records after this. But these records, much like the Velvet Underground or Richard and Linda Thompson, they're kind of albums beloved by musicians that all musicians know, but that's not necessarily that well known by the general public.
Yeah, I would think that I'd be in that. It's just a blind spot for me, Jed. Yeah, it's just I just haven't gotten around to purchasing, not listening on Spotify or YouTube, because that's not how I introduce myself to music. Everything I've heard, and I've heard, many tracks from not just, the number one record, but from their, I think they only did, 3 albums or something like that.
Right.
And they're all great.
They're all classics. And the interesting thing about Alex Chilton's career trajectory is before Big Star, when he was 16 years old, he was in a band called the Box Tops and had a big hit with The Letter.
Yeah, and it still gets, played on, I guess, oldie stations.
Right, and much like Steve Winwood, he had one of those voices. He sounded like an old blues guy or something, like when he was a young guy. But apparently, he made this decision. He just didn't want to play like the music business game. And so with Big Star, he was more just about creatively just trying to make great music. He didn't care, even though he called the record number one record, he just wanted to make great music.
Yeah. He's apparently a renowned eccentric, and, ended up being, he's a dishwasher for many years after Big Star left the music industry. Just, played what he could until he finally started getting, signed as a solo act and releasing solo material. He's, I guess, one of the great popular music eccentrics.
And the interesting thing about, we were saying there's 3 great Big Star records. On the first 2, there was this other guy, Chris Bell, who was almost and maybe as talented as Alex Chilton and a great singer and a great songwriter. So the songs alternate pretty much between Chilton and Bell songs on this record. Sometimes they sing together, but they both have incredible voices. And Bell would leave to do a solo project. He's not on the final album, which is largely driven by Alex Chilton. And Chris Bell died tragically at a very young age, but he has one really good solo album as well.
Yeah, what was the third album? Sister Lovers?
Sisters Lovers, yeah.
Yeah. I've heard, tracks, through the years, through the decades, probably from all 3 albums, and as well as Chilton. Well, okay, there's Big Star.
Yeah, what do you got?
Number one record. I got the Suicide Commandos Make a record.
Okay.
Their only album for 40 years. Came out in 77. Doesn't sound like anything else. Doesn't sound like punk rock. Doesn't sound like... It's really, really limber and really, really bright, rhythmically, melodically. It just jumps. It jumps off the record, and I suppose the production or mix could be considered kind of not very advanced. It suits the music just fine. And if you don't know it, well, okay, the record's out of print, but you can find it on all those usual platforms. Just very, very beneficial to me when I first heard it, when it came out. Courtesy of my older brother, Sean. 3 songwriters, Chris Osgood, guitar and vocals, Dave Alls, drums and vocals, Steve Ballmass, bass and vocals. All 3 were songwriters, all 3 were singers. I don't know how many songs are on it, like 14 or something. They just jump. Very, very funny band, very intelligent lyrics, very cerebral in that regard, which usually is my preferred byproduct of popular music is intellectuality. So there, the Suicide Commandos from Minneapolis, well, by way of Minnetonka. All right, over to you.
All right, cool.
The new folk band from the early 60s. You got the Wild Chopachulas. I'm winding down to my last 2 here. The Wild Chopachulas, it came out 1 album. That'll be another topic we could delve into. People who only ever put out 1 album that are classics. It's produced by Alan Toussaint, great New Orleans musician, producer, and features the Neville Brothers backing vocals, features the Meters on bass, guitar, drums, and keyboards, and the Wild Chopachulas themselves, George Landry, a.k.a. Big Chief Jolly, The Mardi Gras Indian. Are you familiar with the Mardi Gras Indian tradition?
A little bit.
Dudes like to dress up every year
Yep.
at Mardi Gras time as Indians.
Right.
Dates back to the days when escaped slaves, the only people who would have anything to do with them were the local indigenous American Indians, Native Americans. And it became a thing over the last 170 years or whatever. And it's a thing in New Orleans to this day. And it's a gang thing, a friendly gang thing. They're rivals. There's some of the original rappers. And they do this thing all through Lent and Mardi Gras season, marching bands, and second line tradition with their umbrellas and whatnot, and the Mardi Gras Indians, they call them Indians, but they dress up in fancy costume that takes them literally all year to sew together one costume. Very colorful business.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, this is several people, the Wild Magnolias and others, have put out albums through the years. This is probably the original one from 1976. And it's the Meters. That's New Orleans' version of Booker T and the MGs from Memphis, Tennessee. And Neville Brothers and backing vocals, and 3 or 4 Mardi Gras Indians doing the chants and singing. And it's 9 songs, and it's probably the greatest party album ever made.
Mm-hmm.
There you go, the Wild Chapachulas, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay, cool.
Number 1, the Jim Carroll Band, Catholic Boy, 1980.
Okay, interesting.
Yep. That's and it's also a Desert Island Top 10 as well. And they put out 3 albums, 2 more albums after this, one in 82 and one in 84. Bob Clearmountain mixing it. Didn't produce, but might as well have. This guy's, he's a better lyricist than Bob Dylan, and if you want to fight about it, well, we can argue on one album. We shouldn't be comparing. It's not a contest and all that. But that's what I'm going to say about Carroll's. For him, it's probably doggerel. It's not even true poetry for him. He's a published poet.
Yeah.
Years before, when he was 17, he was first published. And that's not taking anything away from my man Bob. That's to say that Carroll's work in the music realm is equally the match of Bob's. Now, granted, Bob has had a lot more material, a lot more years, so there's a lot of different styles, where Jim only really worked 3 albums over a couple of years. There's a couple of spoken word albums. And his voice is equally as unappealing, ugly, off-putting as people find Bob Dylan's. Right? You've heard that. I'm not making that up about Dylan's voice, right?
Right.
So Jim could be that. I'd say he's at least as a singer. His cadence, his phrasing and delivery is at least the equal of Lou Reed's.
Mm-hmm.
So, and Lou Reed at his best. Not Lou Reed when he was older and working with Metallica. That's Lou at his best.
Yeah.
And again, vocally, phrasing-wise, tonality-wise, is the equal of Dylan's at his best. Whenever you want to put that. Blood on the Tracks, Blonde on Blonde, whatever. Yeah, that's one of my... It's on my top 10 Desert Island albums.
Okay.
Jim Carroll Band, Catholic Boy. All right, that's all I got.
All right, I've got some overlaps with yours, so I'm going to skip over those and just run through the rest here. The Smiths' debut, 1984. it's hard to overestimate what an impact this had, especially on UK music culture. This album reached number 2 on the UK album charts, and it stayed in the charts for 33 weeks in 1984. The guitar playing of Johnny Marr was a real revelation to me, more so than the singing of Morrissey. Just from a guitar playing perspective, there's some really good songs on here. What Difference Does It Make? Reel Around the Fountain. The song This Charming Man was not originally on the UK release, but that was kind of like a hit that they put on the US version. The song is really interesting from a guitar perspective. It almost sounds like African juju music or something. It's very cool guitar riff. Just forget about Morrissey for a second. Just from a guitar perspective, it's a great song.
Okay, I guess I can YouTube it. Just the title of the song, 'cause I've heard about it, for years. Apparently, it's considered a really, really good track.
Oh yeah, the guitar riff just bubbles along. It's a really cool riff. Now, what's interesting about the Smiths is in terms of, I'm again kind of like the Ramones. I'm citing this album because of its cultural impact.
Yeah,
but it's not their best album. Okay.
Okay. I wouldn't know. I'm not. Yeah, obviously Johnny Marr's a wonderful guitar player, but I just didn't like the. And there's a whole thing. His not just his singing, but that whole style, this sort of twee or fey, British accent that's always rubbed me the wrong way.
Yeah. No. What's interesting is there's some other albums that have these early songs. Like there's an album called Hatful of Hollow that has like their BBC sessions. And you know how there was like this obscure BBC rule, like to play on the BBC you had to like redo your songs like live because of these obscure musician rules.
Union rules and shit like that, yeah.
Okay. So the versions of the songs on Hatful of Hollow are better than the versions on the debut album by a long shot.
A lot of people say that about a lot of bands that I dig, saying the only ones BBC sessions are whoever, I can't think of, the Pretenders maybe. That's kind of a common thing to hear. Because they're not so heavily produced, they're more immediate, more stripped down, more of the moment, It only took a couple hours to record instead of, a couple weeks, a couple months, a couple years, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. They just have to come up with it on the spot, and it's a lot of times just more musical.
Yeah. Did you know that Martha Hubel's drummer, Buffin, was actually one of the big engineers of the BBC?
No, I did not.
Yes, Paul Griffin?
Okay.
I think it's Paul, yeah. He's one of those guys. That's maybe one of the reasons why so many of those BBC and John Peel sessions and whatnot had such great sound, is because he had a great musician actually, in part engineering them.
Yeah.
Okay, so all right, you got the Smiths.
Yep.
Yeah.
Next one I got is DJ Shadow, his album Introducing from 1996. Did you ever listen to that?
Yeah, I've heard it or parts of it. It just sounds like 1996.
It does. It's got like people like looking through like a record stalls on the cover.
I don't know. I know I've heard it. And
yeah.
It's starting a lot. Moby and just a whole bunch of those people who, these days, to me, comparatively, sound really, really great compared to.
Yeah, well, it's got some cool songs on it, and very much in the spirit of Big Out of Dynamite. There's a lot of cool like samples in it, cool grooves. This guy like kind of routing through his record collection, finding cool samples and grooves.
Yeah, I don't know much about it. I guess I could say the Go Team, their debut album, Lightning Thunder Strike. That's what Ian Parton, who's basically he's the whole band, and recorded a lot of several of their records just by himself, with courtesy of samples.
Yeah.
He was famously go through used record bins and find and apparently the UK version versus the US release of Thunder Lightning Strike, their debut, was different because some people somehow got wind of a couple of samples, like completely unheard of people or entities, and so he had to re-record it without those samples on their first album. Anyway, my point being that it's definitely a legitimate, very legitimate, if it's done right, very enjoyable method of working. Not just big audio dynamo.
Oh, yeah. No, I don't doubt it. I like all the stuff you sent me from the Go Team, so I'm sure it's great.
Yeah. So DJ Shadow, I'm sure he was probably an influence on, Ian Parton of, the Go Team.
Sure.
But there's a whole lot of that stuff, going on in the UK, say in the 90s.
Yeah, I just, as a cultural influence, I think it was important to mention that album because that particular album had a big influence on people.
Okay, all right, yeah.
Next one I got is Elvis Costello's debut album, My Aim Is True, with Watching the Detectives.
Yeah, I know the album. I had the U.S. version when it came out. Not my favorite Elvis album. I think the next one would blow its doors off, mainly because of the attractions. But it's a great album.
It's a great album. We're talking about debut albums, and it's got a lot of really great songs, and it's got. Yes, it has Huey Lewis's band Clover playing. It's still really great. And it's got a great sound to it. It's produced by Nick Lowe.
The Attractions debut album. That would be this year's model, right?
Right.
And if you want to split hairs, so the Attractions, debut album could be considered this year's model. But
yeah. Well, I actually like My Aim Is True better than this year's model, but that's just me.
Well, it's the other way for me, but I can see the point. I can see the point of, My Aim Is True. It's a great album.
Yeah.
The hell with it. It just, the Attractions became such an, for those first few albums,
yeah, it's got an iconic album cover, too. Elvis is looking really cool, kind of knock-kneed, and...
I actually don't... I'm one of those people that don't like the album cover. Okay. I don't like that pose. And especially the picture on the back where he's looking, just him with the guitar. Like, why are you trying to... He's trying to look dorky, right?
Right.
He's actually a pretty cool guy. And granted, he was working, he had some stupid office job or whatever. But, he's a good Irish lad, living in London and doing his thing. It's like, why are you trying? Well, it's a gimmick. And whether, Stiff Records or whatever, tried to get him to play up that aspect for the sake of promotion.
Yeah. A big part of music is marketing, and he put an image out there, and it kind of worked for him.
I know, but it's not just the photo, it's actually the graphics of the record, too, that actually kind of, make my eyes kind of googly.
Yeah, it's got that weird, black and white check thing around the photo.
Yeah, I just don't like it. It's just it's not, pleasing to my eyes. Never has been. It isn't something I decided in the last few years. It's like, at the time, I thought, I don't like this. Even though I like the music.
Yeah.
All right, yeah, good call there. Yep, no, can't argue with My Aim Is True.
Another one from that year, Wire Pink Flag, 1977.
Yeah, I bought it in real time, and I probably sold it 2 weeks later. Yeah.
Just short, sharp, articulate.
37 songs in under half hour or something like that. Yeah.
It's a great record.
Is it? I don't know. I wouldn't know. I listened to it probably 3 times and thought, I might like it today. I might like a whole lot of Wired. They're still an ongoing entity, an ongoing concern.
Oh, yeah.
You know, maybe like the Mekons or something. These days, I'm saying, if I listen to it today, you know, this has happened before. This has happened with, you know, television's Marquee Moon. This has happened with, this has happened with the Mekons. I think I've told you the story. I bought the Mekons Honky Tonkin album in '86 in real time, based on one song I heard on Cafe I.
It's an unusual record. The average song length is like 1 minute.
Right, I know. It's like 37 songs or something in under a half hour. Yeah. It's not 37 songs, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. So anyway.
And it's very angular.
Yeah.
And I might like it today. I
think you would. I
can't remember. A couple of guys, Colin, what's his name? A couple of guys sing on it. And they have offshoot bands as well. And there's still an ongoing thing. They still release music. How do I know this? Because it is a big ongoing thread on this Clash, you know, fan website that I lurk on. I don't post on it anymore. And it's about Wire.
Yeah.
And so I'll look at it occasionally. It's like, God, these guys still have stuff coming out, you know. Not just archival stuff, but, you know, solo stuff and semi-band stuff. And I might like it. I don't know. There's, I guess I like plenty of cold, emotionless, non-human music where I might like it, and that's how I associate them.
Yeah, it's very British.
Yeah, but you know, so are the Rolling Stones. So are the Beatles. You know, they're not cold and emotionless.
Next one, English Beat. I Just Can't Stop It, 1980.
Well, yeah, I guess the Specials album I should put on there, or even better for me, the Selectors.
Yeah, I should have put the first Specials album on there because that's a great record. That totally slipped my mind.
Yeah, I never really got into English Beat. I like that record a whole lot, but not as much as Specials. And actually, I like the Selectors' debut more than the Specials. So, whatever that tells you.
Next one I got is De La Soul, 3 Feet High and Rising from 1989.
Yeah, I've heard it. Yeah.
It was very sample heavy, much like Bay Audio Dynamite, and it only was re-released like a year ago because of how many samples were on it. It couldn't clear the copyright.
Right. I guess. Yeah, I remember, David playing that at work a bunch of times.
Yeah, it's very creative in terms of its musical samples. It's very positive, unlike most rappers who are so like negative. So
I guess that's what I've heard about it.
It's a whole different thing.
A different tip, as they say, a positive tip, as they say back in the day. Yeah, I've heard that about it, and indeed, it did strike me as a very friendly and welcoming. Record. Yeah.
Next one I got is the Cars debut album from 1978. You like the Cars?
I bought it in 1978, man.
You bought it?
I bought it. Yeah, I bought it.
Okay.
In 1978 at Third Stone Records, the Hub Shopping Center, 66 in Nicollet.
Yeah.
And I don't know why I bought it. I'd heard one song. I heard the first song.
Well, it's got some killer tunes on it. It's got Good Times Roll, My Best Friend's Girl, Just What I Needed, You're All I've Got Tonight, Bye Bye Love, Moving in Stereo.
Yeah, I actively dislike all those hits.
Okay, so you're a big fan?
For like 2 minutes. No, I actively disliked it.
Yeah, so you liked it. Okay.
You're right. So don't listen to me. Don't listen. No, what are you trying to say here? I'm a clown. I make you laugh. What? No, I dislike it. And the thing is, I thought I was going to like it, and I don't know why I bought it. I think that was one of those last records I ever bought from reading Rolling Stone magazine or something, or Cream magazine. Must have been Rolling Stone, probably not Cream.
Yeah. So I know they're not a cool band, but I just unabashedly love this record. So
I think they're supposed to be a cool band back when they came out, and I thought they were going to be a cool band, and for some reason I spent my $7.50 on a brand new copy of it. I don't know where I got all the money to buy all this stuff.
No, I didn't like how they evolved in the '80s. I didn't dig that stuff at all. But
I thought the Candy O album was much better.
Oh yeah,
I bought that too.
Yeah, I like this album and I like the Candy O album, and then kind of like REM, like they went in a direction I just didn't dig.
And they're good players. And Okasek, he, had, good instincts. I think he ended up producing Romeo Void's second album, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, see, it's very, it sounds really good through a boombox. It rocks. One of the downsides almost is it's almost too well played, especially like the guitar solos. They're just so, like, it almost sounds like a studio session player.
It just sounds still to me. It sounds like EMAX samplers playing. It doesn't. I thought that was part of their appeal, was to try and do that new wave thing that Devo started.
Yeah, that's right.
Like, we're kind of man machines. This is we're mechanical and futuristic.
Yeah, it's kind of
old and lifeless.
Television mixed with Devo, but like very slick.
I'll take Johnny Thunders.
All right, let's move on then.
Should I tell you how I really feel about it now?
Yeah, let's move on. You're gonna love my next selection after that.
Okay.
The band, music from Big Pink. A big warm acoustic hug.
I was going to, but I was trying to limit till 20, and so I missed the specials and the selector, and I just originally when we talked about this a couple months ago, I had like a 40 on my list, and I threw it away, whatever. So I had to redo it, and I just kept it down to 20. And yep, music from Big Pink, right?
Next one, the Pixies, "Come On Pilgrim," 1987.
That was the debut.
Bone Machine. Remember that song?
I know I've heard it. I didn't know that was their first album. I thought the first album was the one with the Spanish name. Okay. Well, okay. I'm no authority.
No. "Come On Pilgrim" may have actually been an EP. Let's see.
Okay. Well, I'm not trying to split hairs. I'm sure I've heard it, and
it was a debut mini album released in 1987 on 4AD Records. It had Caribou, "Levitate Me." It's a really great record. It just rocks, and it kind of set the template for grunge in terms of musical power, but like way better than grunge.
Well, they were funny. They were clever.
And they were funny and clever. Yeah, it's better than grunge, but it kind of laid a certain framework for it.
What did Steve Kilbey say about grunge? The death of all melody, something like that. No, and the Pixies had this thing called melody, hooks, and things that surprised you. Yeah. There's another, act that I just, never got into, and for no reason. It's like everything I've ever heard. We used to play that Pixie song, "You, Me, and Flamia." Who's that?
Oh, that's right. Where's My Mind?
You're right. We played that, many times.
Now their first full-length LP, "Where's My Mind," is on that. That came out the next year in 1988. That's Surfer Rosa.
Oh, that's the one I was thinking of. Oh, okay.
It has a topless woman on it with a.
Yeah, right. Yeah, apparently they have a new album out. They're reformed and they're going on the road.
Yeah, I heard an album they did a couple years ago, and it was pretty good.
Yeah, well, more power to them, I guess.
But yeah, that next record is Surfer Rosa is just a tour de force. There's a lot of great songs on that record.
That's the one I was actually thinking.
Yeah.
Was their debut. My bad. My ignorance. Okay, Pixies. Yeah. What else you got there? You got anybody else from Boston?
I got a few other things on here, but I'm gonna slim it.
You got Boston on there? You got Jay Giles? What you got here?
No.
Okay.
You're gonna be pleased to hear I don't have those bands on my list, and I have other things listed here, but just to shorten my list, I'm gonna finish with the debut album by the Stone Roses.
I don't know them. I've heard. I had a girlfriend who liked them, and I can't remember anything about them.
A great band.
There's a couple players in there who've played in other bands. They're supposedly great players. I can't remember. Maybe it's the singer.
Well, the singer is Ian Brown.
Okay, he's not the guy that went to jail for unspeakable crimes, is he?
No. I Want to Be Adored, Waterfall, I Am the Resurrection. It's really moody guitar music. The guitar player is this guy John Squire, who's a really great guitar player.
No relation to Chris Squire, I seem like, right?
No, I don't think so. Ian Brown is the vocalist. It's just a great record. I think you'd really like it, actually.
They came out in the 90s, right?
89, the first record.
Yeah, that's probably why I missed them. Yeah, I remember hearing about. I'm sure I've heard them. I don't know. My antenna was, broken or something for quite a while.
Yeah, if you were in the UK, you would know their stuff. They only did 2 records. They did one in 1989, and then everyone was waiting. People had to wait 5 years for their second album, which was brilliantly called Second Coming, which was a kind of a disappointment. Yeah, so
nice. All right.
In terms of chronology, the Stone Roses came along in '89, and then you know this term Britpop, right? That was
right. And how about Blur? Where do they
that was the whole thing. Britpop was supposed to be this rivalry, kind of like the Beatles and the Stones. It was like Oasis versus Blur, right? The whole thing in the British tabloids was, Blur hates Oasis, when in reality, they were friends. Just like in reality, the Beatles and the Stones were friends. But a big influence on Oasis, and I'm not sure about Blur, was the Stone Roses. They kind of like were the precursors of...
What else you got on your list here?
That's all I got.
Those are his final words. That's all I got.
They're kind of like the precursors of Britpop.
Oh.
Like 89, Britpop, when this album came out, there was no Britpop, okay? The height of Britpop was like 95 with like Oasis and Blur, okay? What I was trying to say is that Oasis liked the Stone Roses. Okay, they were inspired by the Stone Roses, okay?
Oh, okay.
Stone Roses were a better band, but I'm just saying that they were kind of an inspiration for Britpop, was all I was trying to say.
Okay. Yeah, I wouldn't know because I missed the whole, it's like if you missed the American Rockabilly revival from the early 80s, the Rock Cats and the Stray Cats, or if you missed the Twin Tone movement in the UK, with the ska thing with Madness, Special, Selector, English Beat, Bad Manners, and all that. You might not have a point of reference,
right?
If you'd never heard these people. I never heard for like 10 years. I never heard any of these people. I used to read about them.
Yeah.
I would read music magazines because I didn't have the internet yet, and so. And I often read unflattering things about them, or one of the Gallagher guys saying we're better than the Stones and the Beatles combined, or whatever.
Yeah.
And I don't know. Maybe they were. Maybe they still are.
Thanks for joining us on the Culture Drop podcast. That was our favorite debut albums. We'll catch you next time.